Most people go through their entire lives without ever knowing what their real strengths are. Notice I am not saying they have no strength. I am saying they do not know what their strengths are. Those are two completely different things. If a person has no strength, that is a talent issue. If a person does not know their strength, that is an awareness issue. Talent may be hard to change, but awareness can change. And yet, how much of your life have you spent trying to get better at something you were never going to be great at? From childhood to adulthood. If your math was weak, you worked on math. If your English was weak, you worked on English. If you were bad at socializing, you forced yourself to become more social. If you were bad at public speaking, you practiced speaking. You kept repairing. You kept filling holes. You kept fighting yourself. But Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, once made a brutal point. It is far more valuable to turn first-rate performance into excellence than to turn incompetence into mediocrity. You may spend 10 years patching up a weakness, only to discover that in the eyes of top performers, it still does not even qualify as an entry ticket. So the real question is this: where is your first-rate ability? Where is your excellence hiding? Drucker did not just raise that question. He also left behind a tool he used for 50 years. It does not require a talent test. It does not require a personality assessment. It only requires a pen, a notebook, and your patience. But before we get to that tool, we need to return to a more fundamental question. Why do you instinctively try to fix your weaknesses in the first place? Because that is exactly how the education system trained you. When you were in school, no teacher praised you for scoring 98 in language arts. They pointed to the 55 in math and said, go work on that. Your parents usually followed the same logic. They always looked at the shortest board. And over time, you absorbed a belief so deeply that you barely notice it anymore. I have to bring every subject up to at least 80, or I am not a qualified person. That logic works in exam-driven education, because exams add up your total score. But once you enter the real world, nobody cares about your total score. The workplace rewards peaks. The market rewards rarity. A person who is 70 out of 100 at everything will rarely be the first choice in any field. In The Effective Executive, Drucker wrote very plainly about a mistake he saw over and over again in organizations. They invested huge amounts of time and money trying to train employees in the areas where they were weak. In the end, those employees improved from failing to barely acceptable. Meanwhile, the areas where they had real strengths were neglected for so long that excellence faded into ordinariness. They lost on both ends. And this is not some rare exception. Harvard Business School once followed more than 2,000 professionals over a period of 10 years. The conclusion was striking. The people who invested 80% of their energy in their areas of strength saw income growth at 3 times the rate of those who tried to develop themselves evenly across the board. 3 times, not 30%, 3 times. Think about how many weekends you have spent forcing yourself to improve a skill you were never naturally good at. Now imagine if all of that time had been poured into the one thing you do best. You would probably be standing in a very different place today. Drucker had a name for this trap. He called it low-level diligence. You are busy. You feel like you are making progress every day, but the direction of your progress is the problem. You are climbing from -20 to +10 while the person next to you, who may not even look as hardworking as you, is doing just one thing, moving from 85 to 95. In the market's eyes, the gap between the two of you is not 10 points. It is the distance between two entirely different species. But now comes the fatal question. How do you know where your 85 is hiding? By intuition? By passion? By what other people praise you for? Drucker rejected all 3. He believed human beings are shockingly bad at judging their own strength. In one of his autobiographical reflections, Drucker revealed that from the 1940s onward, he had used the same method to test the boundaries of his own abilities. He called it feedback analysis. It is not complicated. In fact, it is so simple that you may be tempted to doubt it. But Drucker said it was the only way he had found to identify a person's true strengths. Notice that word, the only way. The process has only 3 steps. Step 1. Whenever you make an important decision, write down what result you expect. Maybe you take on a new project. Maybe you change jobs. Maybe you begin learning a new skill. Write down what you expect to happen in 9 to 12 months, and be specific. Do not write, I hope this goes well. Write something like, I expect this project to help us secure 3 client renewals within 6 months. Step 2. When 9 to 12 months have passed, go back to that page and compare the actual result with your original expectation. Do it coldly. Do it honestly. Do not make excuses. Do not blame outside circumstances. Just look at two things. Where did you do better than expected? Where did you do worse than expected? Step 3. Repeat the process at least 3 times. This is the key. One comparison may be distorted by luck, timing, or random factors. But after 3 rounds, or even 5, a pattern begins to emerge. That is exactly how Drucker discovered something important about himself. He realized that he was remarkably accurate when judging scientific and technical talent, but consistently wrong when evaluating artistic and literary types. That insight helped him avoid countless judgment errors later in his consulting career. So what makes this method so powerful? It bypasses your self-deception. Human beings are born with a cognitive bias that psychology now calls the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less skilled people are in a given area, the more likely they are to overestimate their ability in that area. You think you are good at communication? Maybe you are just talkative. You think you have strong execution? Maybe you just do not know how to say no. You think you have strategic vision? Maybe you simply enjoy sounding insightful from a distance. The cruelty of feedback analysis is this: it does not care what you say about yourself. It only cares what the results say about you. Drucker also emphasized a detail that many people miss. This method does not only help you discover your strength, it also helps you uncover something extremely dangerous: the arrogance of expertise. That is when you are clearly an outsider in one field, but because you have been successful in another, you start assuming your judgment applies everywhere. Many smart people do not fail because they know too little. They fail because they think they understand everything. Now, you may be thinking this sounds useful, but it also sounds slow. And yes, it is slow. It is not a magic pill. And the result may force you to rethink the way you work right now. Let me tell you about a real career transition. There was an ordinary product manager at an internet company in Hangzhou. In 2019, he was responsible for an e-commerce business line at a mid-sized company. He managed a team of more than 10 people. His workdays looked like this: a stand-up meeting in the morning, requirement alignment with designers before noon, arguing timelines with developers in the afternoon, and then writing weekly reports and presentation decks at night. His slides looked polished. He could navigate cross-functional communication. His boss described him as dependable, well-rounded, and free of major flaws. But every year when performance reviews came around, his rating stayed stuck between a B and a B+. He never got an A. He was confused. He worked harder than many of his coworkers. He stayed late more often. So why was his output always decent, but never exceptional? In early 2020, he happened to read Drucker's article on managing oneself and came across feedback analysis. He decided to try it. He wrote down the expected outcomes for 3 projects he was handling at the time. 10 months later, he opened the notebook again and noticed a pattern he had never seen before. Out of the 3 projects, one had gone far beyond expectations. What was different about that project? Its core task had been spotting abnormal fluctuations in user behavior data and predicting a major problem in traffic allocation before it happened. Because of that, the company avoided a serious inventory pileup. The other 2 projects, however, fell short of expectations. And what was the core work in those 2? The very things that took up most of his time every day: cross-team coordination and upward reporting. That was when he realized something important. He was not actually good at communication. He was simply forced to communicate. What he was truly good at was sensing patterns in numbers. He could look at a dense spreadsheet and immediately tell that something was off. He had never taken that seriously, because in his role it was only a small part of the job. Then he made a decision that most people would not dare to make. He asked his boss to move him out of product management and into data strategy. That meant giving up team leadership. It meant dropping half a title level. It meant walking away from the fast track into management. People around him thought he was crazy, but 6 months after the transfer, he had already built 3 data-driven product selection models that raised conversion rates for the business line by 17%. A year later, he became head of the company's data strategy group. His salary went up by 40%. Later, in an internal sharing session, he said something that deserves to be engraved in people's minds. He said, "I used to think I was a Swiss Army knife, someone who could do a little bit of everything. Later I realized the market does not need a Swiss Army knife. The market needs a scalpel." You may say that is just one case, and it cannot represent everyone, fair enough. But ask yourself one question. The thing you spend the most time doing every day, is it really the thing you do best, or is it just the thing you are most used to doing? The gap between those two answers is the gap between the income you have now and the income you should probably be earning. Now you know the method. You have seen the example. What you need next is not a slogan. You need an action list, not vague advice about changing your mindset, not motivational slogans, concrete actions you can start today. Build your expectation journal. Start this week. Do not wait for some life-changing decision. Anything you are working on right now with a clear outcome can be used. If you are writing a proposal, write this down. I expect this proposal to pass review in one round, with no major revisions. If you are following up with a client, write, I expect this client to give a clear response within 2 weeks. The more specific you are, the better. Then close the notebook and set a calendar reminder for 3 months later. When the time comes, open it and compare. In the first round, you may not see much, but if you stick with it for 3 rounds, which means roughly 9 to 12 months, you will begin to see a clear map of your abilities. The things you consistently predict well and often outperform on, those are your strength zones. The things you are always overly optimistic about but consistently underdeliver on, those are your blind spots. The second thing, follow the 3 do not touch rules. Drucker did not phrase them this way directly, but they can be clearly extracted from his theory. Do not keep investing in tasks where you have already poured in enormous effort, yet your output still hovers around the barely acceptable range. That is not always a matter of working harder. Sometimes it means your underlying ability structure simply does not support a breakthrough in that direction. Do not keep chasing work that leaves you drained every single time. Energy is a signal people severely underestimate. Drucker observed many highly effective managers and found that they shared one trait. When they worked in areas of strength, they became more energized, not less. And do not keep clinging to work that takes you 5 hours when it takes someone else 1. A gap in efficiency of more than 3 times usually means the task is outside your sweet spot. That is not something practice alone is likely to erase. The third thing, overinvest in your area of strength. What does overinvest mean? It means going deeper long after other people would say, that is probably enough. Read the most advanced research in that field. Learn from the best people in it. Keep sharpening your strength until it moves from good to overwhelming. Drucker had a phrase for this as well, turn strength into productivity. A strength by itself is not valuable. What becomes valuable is your ability to convert that strength consistently into results that other people are willing to pay for. There is a long distance between I am good at this and the market will pay me for this. What fills that gap is overinvestment. That is how a real barrier is built. And here is one more important reminder, this is not a one-time project. The strength you discover today may become outdated 5 years from now. Markets change. Technology changes. You change. That is why the expectation journal is not something you write once and throw away. It is a lifelong self-monitoring system. Every year you go back and look again. You will meet a different version of yourself. Some strength you once believed in will have faded. Some abilities you never noticed before will begin to emerge. That is the real power of Drucker's method. It does not give you a fixed label. It gives you a mirror that keeps updating. Drucker lived to the age of 95. He wrote 39 books. He advised some of the largest companies in the world and some of the most powerful governments. And yet the thing he returned to again and again was never just how to manage others. It was how to manage yourself. He believed that in a knowledge society, every person is their own chief executive officer. You are responsible for your own development. You are responsible for your own positioning. You are responsible for deciding where you can make your greatest contribution. No one can do that work for you. Most people will go through life with a blurry sense of who they are. They will say, I am doing okay. They will say, I can do a little bit of everything. They will say, I have just had bad luck. But they will never truly sit down, take out a pen, and answer one question with facts instead of feelings. What am I actually best at? There is also a second half to Drucker's old metaphor about the leaking bucket. He was essentially saying, stop trying to patch every hole. Go find your ocean. When a fish stops struggling on the shore and returns to the water, it does not need to learn how to breathe. It does not need to learn how to swim. It was made for the water. So where is your ocean? Your expectation journal will give you the answer. Give yourself 12 months.